Margaret was born at the Château de Saint-Germain-en-Laye on May 14, 1553, within the prestigious House of Valois. She was a king's daughter, and 3 of her brothers would, in their turn, become king.
Catherine and Henry II had a total of 10 children. Margaret was one of the last, the youngest of all the daughters. In reality, she had 2 older sisters. Henry II, his father, would sometimes take her upon his lap, ask her questions, and tease her.
He absolutely adores this little girl. He is captivated by her grace, her striking beauty, her inherent kindness, and she possesses a truly wonderful sense of humor.
But for Margaret, her years of carefree innocence came to an end very early. While the princess was only 6 years old, her father was victim of a terrible accident during the course of a tournament.
Henri II, a true sportsman, a big, handsome man, powerfully built and very strong, absolutely loves these tournaments. He fights once, he fights a second time, he fights a third time, and then he decides to continue the combat. He gets back on his horse.
This type of accident usually never happens at a tournament. The lance shattered and pierced through the helmet and pierced the eye in a completely unprecedented way. The surgeons of the French court are very, very, very unhappy because they absolutely don't know how to remove the piece.
The agony is going to last for a full and complete 10 days.
The lance splinter pierced his brain, and upon its removal, the king died. It is an absolutely appalling tragedy. It is a French tragedy. It is a European tragedy. It's being talked about everywhere. Catherine de' Medici is utterly devastated. We can imagine that her children were also extremely shocked.
Margaret made this observation. That was the greatest misfortune that ever befell our family.
Margaret's elder brother, Francis II, ascended to the throne at just 15. His reign would be marked by a truly dramatic episode, during which the young Margaret was confronted with the sheer horror of her time. In February of the year 1560, the royal court departed to take refuge at Amboise Castle. Reports are circulating about a plot to abduct the king by the Protestant party, to remove him from the influence of his in-laws, the staunchly Catholic House of Guise.
The entire family, including little Margaret, who at that moment is only 7 years old, comes here to Amboise because Amboise is a strong place. It's a fortress, much easier to defend and to militarize. On the morning of March 17, 1560, it was learned from boatmen that there was a significant gathering of horsemen who were arriving and marching directly upon Amboise, 200 horsemen, who were, of course, members of the Protestant party. And at that very moment, it became clear that there was a very real and imminent danger.
The reaction will be as strong as the danger is perceived to be. And it is François de Guise who is orchestrating the entire operation. He ensures the castle is fully armed and assemble an armed group to attack this troop from the rear.
The entire conspiracy, the whole of the Huguenot military workforce disintegrated. They were almost all captured and systematically massacred.
The reprisals matched the crime committed against the crown of France.
An attack upon the person of the king, an attack upon royal power must be sanctioned, and sanctioned with the utmost severity. It is not known whether Margaret of Valois was an actual eyewitness to these terrible massacres. What she might have felt, and what she certainly must have felt, was undoubtedly fear, and she must have clearly understood that truly horrible things were taking place all around her. An image that will forever remain etched in our collective memory is that of those hangings from the battlements of Amboise's balcony, and it's said they no longer even know where they should hang the Protestants, because there are so many victims of this brutal repression.
Of the 10 children Catherine de' Medici had with King Henry II, 6 are still living, 3 boys and 3 girls, but she doesn't have the same affection for all of them. Her interactions with Margaret are, from the very beginning, complex.
Margaret has a great admiration for her mother. She truly loves her mother. Unfortunately, Catherine does have her favourite children. She has a preferred son, who is Henry, the future King Henry III, the one whom she refers to as my eyes, the one whom she calls my everything. And she also has a favourite daughter, Elizabeth, the one who becomes Queen of Spain. Margaret seems a little bit neglected in her mother's affection.
Did Catherine love Margaret? We don't really know, ultimately. We know she didn't spend much time with her when she was a young girl. We know that Margaret herself would later write in her memoirs that she was afraid of her mother, that whenever her mother spoke to her, she would freeze up, as she put it. She would become all stiff as if she were dead. And that was because she knew her very little, and Catherine was certainly a very impressive woman.
However, when it came to education, Regent Catherine de' Medici made no distinction between her children. She made it a point of honor that her daughter Margaret should receive the same high-quality education as her brothers.
Margaret has a very advanced education for a princess. She's undoubtedly one of the most cultured princesses of her time.
She speaks Spanish, she speaks Italian, she speaks Latin.
We know she reads Plato in Latin, and at the same time she learns to ride a horse. She's a perfect rider. She perfectly masters dance.
She plays the mandolin, she plays the guitar, she plays the lute. She sings enchantingly, and her mother encourages her in this education. She intends to marry her off in a prestigious manner, so she encourages her daughter's subtle and highly intelligent nature.
A quality education that shapes Margaret's character, worthy of the illustrious Valois lineage.
Margaret knows herself to be destined for a great destiny. She is the daughter of a king and queen. She knows she will be a future queen, and very quickly she understands she must uphold her position. This, for her, is achieved through culture, through reading, and the quest for an ideal of beauty, as was hoped for in the 16th century. And this truly fascinates her. It deeply captivates her, especially during her youth.
Her other, Catherine de' Medici, is entirely engrossed in the pursuit of power. Nevertheless, she is an attentive mother to the well-being of her 3 youngest children, raised far from court. She frequently receives updates on their well-being from their governess. She also consistently commissions new portraits of her children. Drawings which are preserved today in the library of the Condé Museum, located in Chantilly.
Here are the drawings from Catherine de' Medici's collection. It's the finest collection of drawn portraits from the French Renaissance, and among them, in this portfolio, we have the portrait of the future Queen Margot, Margaret of France. This magnificent drawing shows us the features of the young princess when she was about 8 years old. With the hands detailed in the foreground, a relatively rare feature in 16th century portraits, with a truly remarkable court costume, jewels, and an absolutely extraordinary headdress. A drawing in 3 chalks with lead pencil and black chalk. Additionally, there's red chalk on the lips and colored pencil. And then, in this specific portrait of Margaret, a touch of watercolor was added, but at a date much later than the 18th century. The drawings by François Clouet from the years of the 1550s, as we can see, are extremely finished and extremely meticulously detailed. You can observe how these drawings are very lively, almost as if we were taking photographs today. Here, then, is little François d'Alençon. We understand that the Queen is very interested in her children's education, in their health, and that she is very keen to follow their lives during their early years when, traditionally, they live far from her. The court was constantly moving, and the royal children, in particular, were raised in castles quite far from the court because of the fear of epidemics, and of course, dynastic continuity had to be ensured. So, this is the future Charles IX. He wears a small necklace around his neck, meant to protect him from epidemics as a precaution. But we can also see sick children. This is the future Henry III, most likely, seen lying in his bed, head on his pillow, visibly feverish and weakened. This was a way for the Queen to build a collection of drawn portraits, marking the very origin of drawing in France. The Queen, an Italian princess accustomed to art, would therefore launch this fashion. She would commission more than 450 of them, and all the great figures of the court, following the Queen's example, began their own drawing collections.
As she grew older, Margaret began to form a very special connection with one of her brothers in particular, Henry, the Duke of Anjou, who would later become King Henry III.
They were at first so close that she says they formed, in a way, just one body, one soul.
There's a rather murky and unsettling kind of sexuality, and it's predominantly Henri who harbors desire for her.
But the hypothesis of incestuous relations between Margaret and some of her brothers is rejected outright by the majority of historians.
We must see this as a tax made against her to destroy her reputation. Back then, if you wanted to destroy a woman, you'd say how depraved she was. And incest, a kind of supreme taboo, is meant to show how she's been a woman of ill repute since her youth. You shouldn't give it much credit.
The first undisputed love of Margaret of Valois is named Henri of Guise.
He's about 3 years older than she is. He's a very handsome young man. They're growing up together at the court. She herself is a very beautiful young girl.
She is 16 when he becomes her lover. To get him up to her chamber, she would have him ascend by a rope. They share wild nights of passion. And when dawn breaks, she tells him, "Please leave, because my mother will soon be waking up." But unfortunately, the Louvre has spies.
When Catherine de' Medici discovers the secret romance that is formed between her daughter Margaret and Henri of Guise, her fury is truly immense.
It is rumoured that she slapped her in a fit of anger. Margot, it is widely believed, lost her virginity with the Duke of Guise. Catherine de' Medici raised her children as a small tribe, each member destined to reign over France, and each with their own specific role. But Margaret, however, was slipping from her grasp. She absolutely had to arrive a virgin at her wedding so that no one could ever say to her, "We don't want to marry your daughter. She is no longer a virgin."
But Catherine de' Medici's exasperation had other, more political motives. Margaret's lover belonged to the Guise family. He was therefore an inconceivable match.
It is impossible that Catherine de' Medici's daughter, the architect of religious tolerance, could ever marry the Duke of Guise, the leader of the ultra-Catholics who completely reject the presence of Protestants within the Kingdom of France.
Catherine de' Medici has for a long time been considering other marriage plans for Margaret. She contemplates renowned political parties far beyond the borders of France.
She would dream of marrying her, for example, to the King of Spain, the greatest ruler of his time. But Philip II would not be interested in Margaret, so she had to look elsewhere.
They had considered marrying her to the son of Philip II of Spain, that is, to Don Carlos, who was an epileptic and very probably half mad. They also considered marrying her to Rudolph of Habsburg.
Prince Sebastian of Portugal is also under consideration, but the negotiations do not come to fruition either. It's proving difficult to find a husband for Margaret. It's undoubtedly the personality that the young girl has developed that frightens away her suitors.
Morally, she is certainly someone with a very sharp, a very keen character, undoubtedly biting, and at times perhaps even malicious. She's a person who doesn't win everyone over, and that's precisely why some foreign princes certainly did not wish to marry her. Because she has a bad reputation, no doubt due to her being too quick-witted.
Catherine de' Medici would find another suitor for her daughter, one less brilliant, but who would serve her policy of religious peace. This would be Henry, heir apparent to the Protestant Kingdom of Navarre. These territories, close to the Kingdom of France, extend mainly across the southwest. Margaret and Henri are distant cousins, and they've been acquainted for a very long time. However, the young woman does not wish for this marriage, as everything about her is contrary to Henri, beginning with what is most significant in Margaret's own view, her religion. But religion is not the only domain that separates the two young people.
She's an extremely refined woman, very conscious of her physical appearance, and she has a deep love for cultivating fine literature. This is certainly not the case for Henry of Navarre. He does not possess that kind of education or background. He has a different type of intelligence, but he is not a man of culture. And it is quite paradoxical to see such dissimilar individuals brought together in a marriage, obviously.
She has absolutely no desire to marry him, but nonetheless she has no choice. She is a princess, and she has duties.
Catherine de' Medici forced this marriage upon her. Margaret of Valois simply could not refuse. The only thing she tells us in her memoirs is that while she accepted Henry of Navarre, she would not accept his Protestant faith.
The marriage with Henry of Navarre will indeed take place, a union that seals the destiny of France and that of Margaret of Valois. The romantic life of Margaret of Valois regularly shocked the sensibilities of her time, beginning with her marriage to Henry, King of Navarre, on August 18, 1572, which took place at Notre Dame Cathedral.
The marriage of Henry of Navarre and Marguerite proved to be a cause for scandal, primarily because it was a marriage that appeared to be against nature. Because it was a wedding ceremony that was bringing together a Protestant man and a Catholic woman. To make matters worse, the ceremony itself added to the scandal.
They were married publicly in front of the cathedral, but subsequently the young King of Navarre did not attend the wedding mass.
Now, as husband and wife, Marguerite and Henri are coming together for their very first night as a married couple.
They were only 19 years old in 1572. Their romantic experience is relatively limited, very limited for Margaret. They obviously don't start on a good footing.
There is no love or sexual attraction between these two individuals who are married for political reasons.
But Margaret of Valois and Henry of Navarre very likely consummated their marriage on their wedding night, as was the custom.
It was simply because they had to have a child. They absolutely had to produce an heir to the French crown.
Apart from his marital duties, Henry of Navarre quickly lost interest in his young wife, Margaret, even though she was very attractive.
Margaret of Valois was, in her own time, universally known and widely recognized as, truly, a very, very beautiful woman.
She has a very pale complexion. Her hair is actually brown, contrary to what people believe since she's a blonde princess in the paintings. But she's a false blonde. She wears wigs. She bleaches her hair, as was popular to do in the 1570s.
She has bright, sparkling hazel eyes, which are incredibly, remarkably intelligent.
She is a woman of average height, but she is physically imposing. She is impressive.
She possesses a sensuality that is either heightened or perhaps embellished, I couldn't quite say which, by an extraordinarily opulent pair of breasts that she herself bared right down to the very tips of her nipples. When the future King Henry IV became less friendly with her, he gave her the nickname Madame des Chameaux.
Margaret of Valois was immensely popular, and she was conscious of her ability to please. And she wanted to please.
Confident in her physical assets, Margaret takes the utmost care of them.
Her personal beauty ritual is already quite different from the people of her own time.
She would have balms custom made for her. She would have cream specially prepared.
Margaret takes 2 baths every day, and she has donkey milk put into her bath in order to preserve a white complexion. So she washes herself, and she perfumes herself.
But what particular perfume did Marguerite of Valois like to wear? The study of these archives has made it possible for us to identify their main ingredients. A valuable piece of information, thanks to which the perfumer Nicolas de Bari, who was passionate about history, was able to recreate the fragrance that Marguerite held dear.
It was known, thanks to writers of that period, such as Brantôme and even Ronsard himself, that this particular perfume possessed a lingering trail composed predominantly of jasmine. So this is what jasmine concrete looks like when it arrives from the producer. You see, it's a bit like caramel or wax. Amber, which is a secretion from the sperm whale, a large marine mammal. It forms a stone that we grind into powder to mix with, the wax. Musk, which comes from the Himalayan musk deer, is protected, so we can only use synthetic copies. To make the alcoholic perfume, I'm going to put in a certain number of jasmine drops. I'm also adding amber, but in a much smaller quantity, because it is extremely powerful. And the musk, which is the most powerful, giving it that slightly animalistic, truly very sensual note to the fragrance, so we use less of it. Here, I've prepared what we call the concentrate, and into this, I'll be adding alcohol. Now, in modern perfumery, the standard is to use approximately 10% concentrate for 90% alcohol, with a margin of 2 or 3%. And so now, I have successfully recreated Margaret's alcohol-based perfume. It's true that, at that time, people really loved these kinds of products, but you still needed to be bold enough to wear such a spectacular fragrance. It's a floral, sensual fragrance, one that truly makes its presence felt throughout the entire vicinity, I would say. Margaret was certainly not just anyone, and her perfume perfectly reflected that image. She uses it in the form of a solid perfume, known as a balm, an ointment, or a pomade, but that doesn't mean it possesses any medicinal properties. We also used what were called pomanders, to be accompanied by an appealing scent. It was a time of much plague and cholera, and it was thought that perfume worn on the body would ward off plague and cholera, that good scents ward off bad odours, and even that it wards off the evil eye and the devil. Therefore the perfume is at that moment an esoteric, indeed mystical function.
Like all the noble women of her time, Margaret of Valois, to enhance the natural paleness of her skin, employed cosmetic aids. Too much, according to her mother-in-law, the very strict Jeanne d'Albret.
Jeanne d'Albret, who was an extremely devout Protestant, always dressed in a simple black gown, stated, "This lady, I must say, appears very suspicious to me. She is made up with white lead and rouge, just like a common streetwalker."
Margaret was wearing a considerable amount of makeup, and that's a point that was emphasized by all her contemporaries.
She would apply a variety of heavy metal-based preparations to her face to achieve her unnaturally white complexion. This was a common practice during the Renaissance, but not without danger, as a beauty historian explains to us.
You almost see plastered faces. When you look at the paintings, you might be surprised to see this kind of mask. The noble must mask his feelings, and it's crucial to mask emotion, especially at the court. Why? Because emotion can reveal weaknesses. It can also reveal vulnerability. That's why the color white is extremely important. It's both the color itself and its inherent brilliance. Ceruse, which is the most widely used product, is lead carbonate, obtained through mixtures that the Renaissance began to master relatively well, and which produces a very, very strong white. And then, you also have mercury-based products, which tend to restrict the skin's surface and give it a much brighter sheen. So, for example, here you have quicksilver, you have mercury chloride, and of course, both are particularly dangerous. Mercury chloride, it corrodes, it burns, it sort of dries out the skin, it cracks it. And at the same time, the fact that it penetrates inside, it reaches the gums, it loosens the teeth. As for lead, it also affects digestion, leading to the well-known effects of lead poisoning. Doctors are aware of this danger, but it's a danger that typically manifests itself over a relatively long period of time. There's a magnificent example, a Venetian courtesan in the time of Marie de Valois named Franco, who lived in London for 3 years, then returned to Venice. And when she came back, she said, "I don't recognize these faces. They're completely ruined. So the effect is still very noticeable, and at the same time, the more visible the effect, the more people use the product to conceal it.
When Marguerite multiplies her affairs and takes many lovers, that's not normal in the spirit of the times, because a woman should not give herself over to such repeated acts of adultery. That is a masculine privilege. She is rebellious in that particular area against what people think one is supposed to be as a wife.
And she was pointed at for that. Her detractors did not hesitating to call her a nymphomaniac, a sick woman, a man-eater, which was not the case. She was truly a woman who followed her heart's desires.
She's always more or less in love with the very same kind of gentleman, who is, in fact, the perfect model of a courtier. Men who are handsome and brilliant, who prove themselves valiant soldiers in wartime, but who also, at the same time, shine brightly at court balls, excel in the art of conversation, and are just as cultivated as she is.
And the man who possessed all the qualities was Bussy d'Amboise, a captain who was barely 25 years old. Margaret was 21 when she met him.
He is tall, very well built, a magnificent specimen, very pious, of course.
A military man, experienced, an extremely brilliant and learned individual who evidently turned many heads at court.
He compliments her. He takes great care of her in public. There's an entire system of seduction that plays out between the two of them, and she eventually gives in to his advances.
But Bussy d'Amboise meets a brutal end, assassinated by the jealous husband of yet another of his many mistresses, a tragic fate he shares with other lovers of Margaret, including Joseph Boniface de la Mole, who was executed after having conspired against the king. It was upon the occasion of this disappearance that legend attributes to Margaret a ritual that was, to say the very least, morbid.
This execution obviously will hit her hard. It's claimed she asked for her lover's decapitated head to carry with her for a final kiss, and to bury it specifically far from the body.
Rumor has it that Marguerite engaged in another equally macabre practice regarding her vanished lovers.
Some pamphlets recount that she kept the embalmed hearts of her many lovers within her farthingales. These farthingales, for those unfamiliar, were small basket-like structures fastened to the understructures worn beneath the voluminous gowns of that particular era. And by this, it was implied she was a kind of black widow, preserving carnal mementos of her companions.
A woman with a morbid sexuality, Margaret was also a genuine nymphomaniac who, during a second period of her life, no longer contented herself with men of her own social class.
Well now, her lovers are dropping a bit in status. If I may say so, she's actually going to recruit quite a lot from the local gentry.
So, we would start by considering the more prominent members of society, and then, ultimately, the final list comprised coppersmiths, stablemen, and cooks.
We know she had a somewhat longer relationship with the master of her chapel, a man named Claude Francois, who was also a singer.
The pamphlets are claiming that she would accept a little bit of everything that could possibly charm her.
But Margaret, a woman with an ardent sexuality, also shows herself capable of sustaining a relationship that truly values the noblest emotions. And so, she falls deeply in love with Jacques de Harlay, the Lord of Champvallon, a man who was particularly brilliant and handsome. Their intensely passionate and all-consuming love story would last for 3 years.
She was extremely fascinated by this man, who embodied the chivalrous soul she had always hoped to find in a man. She wrote letters that were completely impassioned.
It's a rather extraordinary collection of letters in which she speaks about a love that is perfect, a love that is ideal.
Therefore, I urge you to dispel the clouds of these important obstacles that separate our bodies, but which can never separate our souls, united by an eternal destiny and bound by an eternal bond.
It's a conception of love that is not solely physical, but a Neoplatonic conception of love. This means that love is both the fusion of bodies and the fusion of souls. Therefore, one's lover must be their equal on all levels.
A spiritual, but also carnal relationship that Margaret would not hesitate to openly pursue at the Louvre court, despite her status as Henri of Navarre's wife.
Previously, her romantic relationships were tolerated because they remained relatively discreet. But from the moment they almost reached the stage of cohabitation, that's when it started to cause problems.
The situation is made all the more delicate by a rumor claiming that Margaret is pregnant by her lover, Champvallon.
When accused of being pregnant, she insists, no, never. Champvallon never touched me. It's certain she was in love with Champvallon. It's possible she had intimate relations with him. Perhaps she even had a child and gave birth in secret in 1583. That's what the rumors at court claim.
Margaret is expelled from the Louvre Palace. This scandalous event quickly made its way through all the courts of Europe and only served to further fuel her already notorious reputation. As daughter, sister, then wife of a king, Margaret of Valois always had a profound awareness of her royal rank.
She is the Pearl of Valois. That's the nickname she was given. She is, in a way, the one and only, beside whom all other women, even from the French nobility, are nothing more than mere chambermaids.
Every single one of her actions and gestures carries a political role and a political meaning, as well as a cultural significance. Her entire life is a staged performance until her very last breath.
Her life was a carefully orchestrated production from her earliest childhood, managed by what was known as a household, a dedicated group of individuals devoted to her service. Thus, by the age of 6, Marguerite already commanded a staff of 120 employees, a number that would eventually swell to 264 by the time she became a young woman. During her most prosperous years, she was one of the most well-endowed members of the royal family, with revenues that could reach up to 200,000 livres tournois. This is to be compared with the annual salary of an agricultural worker, barely 90 livres. All of her incomes, and especially her expenditures, are meticulously documented in his ledger books, which are now preserved at the National Archives.
The expense register of Marguerite is not exclusively concerned with the person of the Queen. These expenditures encompass both the wages, meaning the salaries paid to her officers, her ladies-in-waiting, and her domestic staff, but they also cover all the daily expenses of her entire household. These covered both Marguerite's personal food expenses, as well as the provisions for her servants, her officers, her horses, and her stablemen. There were also the purchases of various garments for her footmen and her ladies-in-waiting, because she was the one who paid for all the clothing of the members of her household.
But Marguerite also dedicates a substantial portion of her budget to her own personal splendor, and this, particularly during the most opulent periods of her life.
In the month of October, in the year 1576, Margaret commissioned a complete Amazonian riding habit, and we also possess the detailed description of the hackney's attire, the mare's outfit, which was perfectly matched to her own Amazonian habit. She orders 2 ells, 24 of black taffeta, 8 skeins of thread to line the taffeta with green Genoa velvet, and 14 large Polish-style silver buttons. What we can say is that, in fact, she always spends more than what she actually has in terms of income.
A single one of these dresses is the entire price of 10 long years. Do you hear me? 10 years of living for a farming family.
But at the court of the Valois, fashion is anything but frivolous. On the contrary, it serves to demonstrate the magnificence of the reigning family, a lesson Margaret learned from her mother.
Catherine de' Medici told her daughter, "It's up to you to set the example, dress well, and everyone will follow you. So you must play that role, even if it means you'll live miserly. A little queen with a little kinglet of Navarre. It's still up to you to set the example."
Margaret was raised and grew up within this very culture. And As a princess of royal lineage and noble birth, she is precisely bound to showcase the splendor and opulence of the French court through her elaborate attire.
Nothing is ever too grand to maintain the lavish splendor of her elevated rank. Margaret personally commissions her elaborate ensembles from the most exquisite and refined fabrics of her entire era. Only a small number of French Renaissance textiles have survived. Some are preserved at the National Museum of the Renaissance at the Château de Caen, including the most sought-after fabric from the era of Margaret of Valois.
Velvet is one of the most precious, and indeed one of the most expensive fabrics. It is extremely complex to produce, requiring great skill. It's a true technical achievement to successfully create a velvet fabric. We imported a great deal of these luxurious velvets from various regions of Italy, notably from cities such as Lucca and Florence, but the vast majority came from Genoa. And despite the establishment of local workshops in French cities like Tours or Lyon, the exquisite Genoese fabrics consistently held the preference of French princes, princesses, and the entire aristocracy. This truly exquisite velvet fragment is a genuinely exceptional piece, on which we can clearly discern a beautiful cream-coloured background, two distinct velvet effects, one in cut pile and the other in looped pile, and an additional captivating effect achieved by delicate gold threads forming tiny loops amidst the vibrant red silk pile. Gold-threaded fabrics shimmer much more than others in the light, giving the impression of a goldsmith's garment that shines when worn. One can easily imagine Margaret de Valois wearing an intricately cut velvet, adorned with shimmering gold threads, much like this one.
While Margaret uses her attire to underscore the majesty of her noble rank, she is also truly passionate about fashion and never hesitates to create new styles.
Margaret abandons the fashion of ruffs, those very large, elaborate collars, adorned with an enormous amount of intricate lace, which completely encircled and framed the face.
She imposes colours, the incarnadine, this kind of pale red, an orange-red hue that she adores, which contrasts with the ordinary attire of the people at court, who are in reality much more subdued.
Margaret, in this way, adds her personal touch to the feminine silhouette. Back in that era, the costume was quite elaborate. It was comprised of an underlying structure that could easily weigh up to 6 kilograms, which essentially turned the entire process of dressing into a veritable construction project.
Here we have a quilted bodice known as a corps pique, which was an essential piece of women's Renaissance costume. It's considered the ancestor of the modern corset. The waist is indeed cinched, but its primary purpose isn't to compress the waistline. The true aim is really to flatten out the feminine curves as much as possible. Flattening the chest, flattening the stomach, which means that here we are going to form the first V of the body silhouette. At the front, you would find the centerpiece of this quilted garment, a central component that was thicker and wider, known as the basque, and it was crafted from wicker, metal, or ivory. You couldn't dress yourself alone. It wasn't possible, as the lacings were almost entirely in the back. This is what we call a farthingale. It was believed to help preserve a woman's virtue, so it simultaneously served as a powerful symbol of fertility and also of chastity. It's the specific type of underskirt that was worn beneath Renaissance dresses. At the bottom of the farthingale, a wicker framework was placed, which allowed to weigh down the entirety of the structure and to give it that typical conical shape. We're going to add to this silhouette a fabric crescent, which at the time was called a boudin, and it was stuffed with horsehair. The idea was to add volume to the back so that the final dress could sit on it, allowing the pleats to unfold beautifully on the back of the body. Then we add the very first decorative element of the costume, specifically a guimpe, which is adorned with a small ruff around the neckline. Obviously, the fabrics used was more noble, more silky, and they were sometimes decorated with intricate embroidery, delicate pearls, or sparkling jewels. And so the main exhibit, the dress, we're going to display the entire gown upon this structure. It's important to understand that during that historical period, fashions varied significantly across different countries and regions. There was a great diversity of fabrics, shapes, and colors. This was also true for the jewelry. The gowns were lavishly adorned with intricately sewn pearls, and with jewels, and with precious gems and sparkling stones. It added immensely to the grandeur of the entire costume. Fashion changed every 10 years during the Renaissance, with evolutions in the shapes of ruffs, in the forms of dresses, of their structures, of sleeves, of wimples, but this was an era where feminine attributes were concealed. Nothing was shown, everything was merely suggested. Aside from the hands and the face, no skin was visible.
But Margaret takes some liberties with the sartorial expectations of her day.
She'll be the first to truly wear low-cut gowns, with a neckline deep enough to showcase her bust. Necklaces will truly emerge at that time. And so, freeing the neckline will launch this trend of jewellery, of necklaces, and this trend will be adopted throughout Europe.
Margaret establishes a magnificent court at Nérac when she arrives at the castle, a court that competes with the Valois court at the Louvre. She truly establishes around herself a very brilliant literary court, and she surrounds herself with the region's finest artists, including poets, actors, and humanists, to bring this aura to the court of Nérac.
Artists and intellectuals are drawn to the small city of Nérac, located near Agen, by the truly exceptional reputation of this cultured woman.
She discussed everything. She read everything from philosophy, mathematics, science, and medicine. Books on medicine were dedicated to her. She was spiritual, she was witty, she was learned. And people around her came to see her.
Among the prominent intellectuals who were received in Nérac, there was one who was more particularly impressed by his meeting with Margaret.
Montaigne was invited. He was dazzled. And Montaigne read her a large part of his essays. And he had said, "I don't dare continue my essays, they're too modest." And she was the one who told him, "I beg you, Monsieur de Montaigne, continue. It's magnificent and simple writing, and we learn so much with such economy of language. You bring us a great deal."
This brilliant court is frequently found in the park that Margaret commissioned to be specially laid out along the base, the river which flows at the foot of the castle, a garden where a cordial, yet also loving, understanding reigns between Catholics and Protestants.
The Garenne Park was primarily a place for entertainment, strolls, leisure, and social gatherings, and among the many amusements, there was the game of jeu de maille, or palamal, which was, so to speak, the ancestor of croquet or golf. The rules imposed by the game allowed the courtiers, both Huguenots and Catholics, who came to the park, to converse at their leisure. This small path, which is known as the Chemin des Soupirs, provided a discreet route for courtiers to secretly engage in the romantic intrigues that blossomed within the park grounds. And it was sufficiently well hidden, allowing everyone to pursue their relationships there with complete discretion.
At the court of Nérac, Huguenots and Catholics only separate to fulfill their religious duties.
Margaret of Valois states quite clearly in her memoirs that they would go to the sermon while we would attend Mass, and then there was the ball, there was the dinner, and so on. In the end, everything worked out quite well. And all of Henry IV's ministers who left their memoirs have a truly enchanted memory of this period.
Marguerite achieved something that practically no one else has ever managed to accomplish, bringing Protestants and Catholics together through the shared values of culture, beauty, literature, and philosophy.
What truly matters is to be brilliant. It is to love life, and that is what characterises the court of Nérac.
An aura of profound happiness and deep affection, whose reputation is destined to travel well beyond the very borders of France.
Nérac becomes such a significant legend across the whole of Europe that even William Shakespeare, when he pens his famous play, Love's Labour's Lost, in 1595, he draws very heavily for his creative inspiration from Nérac and the character of Margaret.
A woman of letters, Margaret herself bequeathed several writings to posterity. The most precious of these, without a doubt, is her collection of memoirs. And it is partly thanks to her greatest admirer, Brantôme, that this particular account exists today. The writer one day addressed to her an apologia, a detailed chronicle celebrating her glory and her life. But the main problem is that the text is full of numerous factual inaccuracies.
She was certainly very flattered by Brantôme's interest, and then she perhaps wanted to correct, to revisit a number of elements.
And so she takes up her pen, essentially as if to compose a letter, a rather lengthy one, and she states, "I will explain to you why you are mistaken here, 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 and here." At a certain point, she then decides to present a chronological account.
And that's how she perhaps became engrossed in the process of writing the memoirs she's currently working on, undoubtedly dedicating several years to them.
No woman had ever written her memoirs during that period.
These memoirs are exceptional because they are lived snapshots.
One could say she acts as a historian. And what's very interesting in this narrative is that she will justify herself not only to Brantôme, but also to posterity.
She wants to leave a trace of an exceptional princess.
The memoirs of Margaret of Valois that have come down to us are incomplete and abruptly stop in 1582, without us knowing why. But they remain a precious testimony to better understand the destiny of this truly extraordinary woman. At the break of dawn on August 24th, 1572, the day known as Saint-Bartholomew's Day, the alarm bell, the tocsin, gave the signal. Several hundred Protestants were executed by Catholics.
St. Bartholomew's Day, it's not just the tragedy of the French 16th century, it's the tragedy of France's history. St. Bartholomew's Day, in a way, leaves an indelible mark on the actions of the Valois in this country.
These are several long days of massacres, of screams, of appalling depredations. It is estimated that there are 3,000 dead in Paris and tens of thousands of deaths across the entire country, in Lyon, in Bordeaux, in Toulouse, in Rouen.
Even in Carcassonne, the executioner massacred a Protestant and devoured his heart in front of everyone.
Never before has the Kingdom of France experienced such events.
This tragedy occurred only 6 days after the marriage of Margaret of Valois and Henry of Navarre. And this happened 6 years before the peace of the court of Nérac. With the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, the war between the two religious factions reaches its absolute climax.
The Protestants believed the Catholic Church had completely lost its way, that it was deeply troubled by issues of wealth and finance, and that it faced significant moral failings. It's true that cardinals and bishops lived at court, maintaining mistresses and even having children.
The image of the Protestant in the 16th century is the man in black. Neither men nor women would wear anything flashy. And the difference between Catholics and Protestants is also shown through colours, but also through their manner of dress.
Princesses, such as Margaret, possess magnificent clothing featuring fabrics richly embroidered with gold, silver, and precious gems. And on the other hand, Protestants set themselves apart with very sombre attire. When there are celebrations at court, they do not dance.
It's a requirement that often originates with intellectuals, with very rigorous individuals, people who would genuinely wish for their own religion, Christianity, to be truly seen as worthy.
50 years after the establishment of Protestantism, 2 million adherents had already converted, representing 10% of the French population at that time. With the support and adherence of the nobility, this new religious confession began to play a truly significant political role, directly threatening the Catholic royal authority. The overall situation quickly degenerated into a brutal and deadly conflict.
That's what's very strong in the minds of many Catholics. According to them, these people who are different and have marginalized themselves will provoke God's anger. And when they massacre the Protestants, they will try to reveal the demonic character within them. They gouge out their eyes, they cut off their ears, they disembowel them, they cut off women's breasts, they cut off their noses, they throw the bodies into the river, they tear out their hearts, revealing the inhuman nature of these minions of Satan who wish to provoke sin.
It's a terrible civil wars, where religious and political divisions even extend into the most intimate of relationships, into the very heart of families.
It's an extremely troubled time, that's for sure, with very complicated alliances. In the South, for example, you most often have alliances between Protestants and Catholics, even though officially these people are not on the same side. There is obviously no understanding between the somewhat centrist Catholics and the Catholics we call zealous. The problem for France at that specific period was that it wasn't only France involved. The entirety of Europe was playing a part, and you had, notably, the Southern powers who absolutely did not want Protestantism to spread to their territories, and so they were financing the civil war in France. And then you had the Northern powers, England, Flanders, Germany, and so on, who were also funding the civil war in France, but with the aim of seeing Protestantism advance.
Margaret, on the other hand, is a devout Catholic who was never tempted by Protestantism. Her marriage to Henry of Navarre, which was orchestrated by her mother, Catherine de' Medici, was intended to reconcile the two opposing factions. However, a single event ultimately caused this grand ambition to fail.
On August 22nd, 1572, a very prominent Protestant lord, the Admiral of Coligny, who was one of the principal war leaders and indeed the main commander of the Protestant faction, was wounded by an arquebus shot just a few streets away from the Louvre. Immediately the Protestants cry out for justice. They are numerous, they are well armed, and they are experienced. They demand of the King of France, Charles IX, and of his mother, Catherine de' Medici, that they avenge the admiral.
To avoid the revenge of the Protestant leaders, the solution that would have been used was precisely their massacre.
It is now almost universally accepted that the decision to cut off the head of the Protestant party was made by the King's Council, specifically within a very restricted council.
If Charles IX is the King of France, his brother Henry of Anjou and his mother Catherine de' Medici also take part in the decision to eliminate about 50 Protestant captains. Everything was decided at the heart of power in the Louvre Palace, where the court of France is located.
We are here in the large ground floor hall of the Louvre, known as the Hall of the Caryatids, due to the presence of these 4 large Greek-style female figures, supporting a platform where musicians could play. This grand hall is truly the heart of the Louvre. It's a place for parties, it's a place for balls, but it's also, on Saint-Bartholomew's Day, the heart of chaos, the heart of the massacres.
On the evening of August 23rd, the tension is at its peak in the corridors of the Louvre. But Margaret is completely oblivious to everything.
Before the massacre even began, Margaret is with her mother, Catherine de' Medici.
Her elder sister, Claude, Duchess of Lorraine, is also present. Apparently, she has already been informed of the massacre. Catherine then says to Margaret, "You must return to your own apartments."
Margaret of Valois, who is obliged to obey her mother, observes her sister in a state of extreme agitation, attempting to grasp her arm. She then says to her, "But my dear sister, please do not go."
Claude begins to weep uncontrollably, probably thinking that Margaret would be risking her very life by returning to her own private chambers.
Margaret begs her mother to stay here, close to her and her sister Claude, and Catherine orders her to go and rejoin her husband, for her rightful place is in her marital bedroom.
She has to go there so as not to cause concern among the Protestants. If she didn't go, it would mean that something was amiss.
She was not privy to the inner workings of the monarchy. She was there merely as a background extra, a participant in the wedding ceremony, and that was all.
Margaret, initially just an extra, wouldn't remain in that position for very long. She was destined to become one of the few direct witnesses to the atrocities and summary executions, a night that she would later recount in her memoirs, several years down the line.
She hears someone knocking and crying at her door. They're pounding, shouting, "Navarre, Navarre," and then they burst into her chamber. It's a gentleman she had never seen.
Actually, it was a young Protestant, Monsieur de Lérand, who was asking for help. She opened the door and said, "Hide with me." So she saved this man and tended to his wounds. She was kind to him and helped saving Protestants.
In the early hours of that morning, it wasn't only the leaders of the Protestant party who were assassinated, but hundreds of men, women, and children.
This magnificent staircase, built under Henry II, is decorated with hunting themes. Originally, it was to celebrate Diane de Poitiers, the king's mistress, but on St. Bartholomew's Day, The hunt became a hunt for Protestants. In its corridors, on its steps, in its stairwells, corpses pile up. Margaret sees them collapse at her feet, rolling down the stairs.
There's such a danger in the hallways. People are constantly slitting each other's throats. There are daggers everywhere. There is blood all around. She will write in her memoirs, her dress was bathed in blood.
It's easy to picture the immense fear Margaret of Valois must have felt at that very moment, with bodies strewn across the Louvre's grand corridors.
In the morning, Paris transforms into a charnel house. The population, in a certain way, releases years of resentment, years of anguish that it had accumulated since the beginning of the wars of religion. 3,000 people are killed, and most of the bodies are thrown into the Seine. And we can imagine Margaret leaning from the castle windows, contemplating the river and watching the floating corpses. The river turned red, and that is no mere figure of speech.
Beyond the initial shock and trauma, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre delivers a genuine electroshock to Margaret. She no longer wishes to be the political instrument of her mother and her brothers.
There was, you might say, a sort of baptism by fire, so that just a few days afterwards, when her mother asked her that she cancels her marriage and states that it had not been consummated, she replied that it's over, that she's married, and what is done is done.
For Margaret of Valois, it is important to possess a crown. She is extremely proud to belong to what was then known as the Valois dynasty. Consequently, she possesses a deep sense of pride in her lineage, and it seems entirely natural to her, considering her exceptional qualities, to have a kingdom over which she would wish to reign.
From the year 1575, Margaret sought to play a significant political role. But quickly, her positions would confuse and prove totally incomprehensible and incoherent.
After the death of Charles IX, it was Henry who ascended to the throne of France, Henry III. Margaret, on the other hand, is joining the opposition.
Margaret allies herself with her young brother Francis, who is a Catholic prince, a young prince of the blood, a potential heir to the crown. He gathers around him a diverse group, religiously mixed, both Catholic and Protestant. They are known as the malcontents.
This movement of malcontents, they are discontent with the king because they feel they are being kept out of political life. They believe they do not benefit from the favors, the official positions, and the pensions that others are receiving.
So, she becomes involved in this somewhat peculiar nebulous group that unites individuals from both sides. But is she truly in favor of religious pacification, of the rights of Protestants? We simply don't know.
She adapts and evolves to try to keep her position, to keep her rank, to keep her influence.
She must have thought, if I play this card, I'll join the group that's going to win. The problem is the group lost.
The adventure is cut short when Margaret's youngest brother falls gravely ill. Francis contracts tuberculosis and tragically dies in 1584. He is only 29 years old.
This death, quite obviously, was a bombshell. From the moment Henry III had no children, it was very probable that he would never have any. And the fact that the last of the Valois line would disappear without having fathered any children meant that the crown, according to French public law, would fall to a distant cousin, it's true, a 21st-degree cousin, Henry of Navarre, who was Protestant.
This is an absolutely unprecedented event in the history of the Kingdom of France, as a Protestant is the heir to the throne.
The European countries, just before the start of the wars of religion, made a decision. They gathered and decided that the people must follow the religion of their prince. So if a prince is Protestant, the people must be Protestant. There are still approximately 3/4 of the population in France who are Catholic and have no desire whatsoever to give up their religion.
Her husband is now the rightful heir to the crown, and Margaret can legitimately hope to one day become the Queen of France. However, she adopts a stance that is entirely unexpected. After having associated with the moderate Catholics, she then draws closer to the Catholic League, a movement comprised of ultra-Catholics. From now on, Margaret is not only opposing her brother, King Henry III, but also her husband, Henry of Navarre.
This involvement with the Catholic Party is a desperate woman's act in a way. It's her personal resentments, perhaps even her desire for revenge at that moment, against these two men, against the two Henrys, that explain why she takes up arms, and it's tragic for her. It's a decision she shouldn't have made.
she decides to assert herself as the leader of the most radical Catholics in the south of the kingdom. She joins Agen, a town that was part of her dowry, and of which she is the countess.
She makes the firm decision to equip herself with all the necessary means to resist any attack coming from the outside. She raises the taxes and then proceeds to have a formidable citadel constructed.
She required strong ramparts and cannons to be fired upon her enemy. Therefore, because she needed these fortifications, she quite simply ordered the complete demolition of the houses belonging to the people who lived down below.
All this did not allow her to make many friends in her fiefdom of Agen. She reigns, but over a very small piece of territory, and with a certain despotism, moreover, which would provoke the revolt of the Agenais and force her to leave the city.
In reality, she lacks the military resources for this peculiar ambition she harbored at that time, to establish herself as one of the Catholic League's leaders in the kingdom's south.
She no longer has any support, as she is in open rebellion against both her brother, King Henry III of France, and her husband, Henry of Navarre. And now she's like a hunted animal, fleeing day after day from castle to castle.
Margaret is attempting to escape the king's army, which is pursuing her.
During her flight, she makes a stop at the Château de Saint-Projet in the Tarn-et-Garonne region.
This residence preserves a unique testimony of its passage.
It was September 26th, 1585, the day Queen Margot arrived at this castle, injured from a fall from her horse. Legend has it, she tied her horse to this ring.
In 1990, the owner of the castle made an incredible discovery. 4 centuries after Queen Margot had passed through its very walls.
We are in the antechamber of Queen Margot. This antechamber was under renovation, and it was during these works that a door was discovered that led to Queen Margot's chamber, which had been walled up after her departure. It was a common occurrence following the passage of a king or a queen that the door through which the illustrious personage had passed would be walled up. In this room, there was furniture from Queen Margot's era, so her bed, with its canopy, features the original fabric from Queen Margot's bed, with gold and silver threads, and this rust color that Queen Margot loved very much.
Queen Margot was in the process of making her escape, and in the urgency of this hurried flight, she completely overlooked a rather important trunk that was still sitting in her private chambers.
We are in the castle chapel. It was here that Queen Margot came to seek solace and pray. It was a very uncertain, a very trying period for her. She prayed a great deal, and she wondered if she would survive this unfortunate chapter of her life.
Her wild, desperate flight finally comes to its conclusion in the year 1586. Margaret is then apprehended in the region of Auvergne. His brother, King Henry III, decides to neutralize her and to have her imprisoned in the Château du Sang.
To begin with, she is utterly desperate. The first day, when she saw the fortress, it was a military citadel with icy corridors and no furniture. She was served a bowl of bean soup, a piece of bread. She was desperate, absolutely terrified. The rumor quickly spread that she would be decapitated in the courtyard of the fortress.
She genuinely fears for her life. But in reality, very quickly, she begins to live quite freely within the fortress walls. And because she effectively detached herself from this political context, the two Henrys decide to leave her there, reasonably assured that from that point forward, she has ceased to involve herself in the French political scene.
In the realm of politics, she consistently tried to play a significant role. I believe I can confidently state that she invariably chose the wrong side. She was always part of an opposition that never brought her any political satisfaction whatsoever.
Margaret's exile in the Auvergne region would last for almost 20 years. In 1593, Margaret celebrates her 40th birthday. She has no children, and she will most likely never have any. 4 years earlier, her husband had converted to Catholicism and became Henry IV, King of France. Now, he needs an heir. He then reestablishes contact with his wife to propose a deal.
The king desires to remarry, and since he wants to remarry, he must first get a divorce. He needs to have his marriage annulled.
Initially, he wished to divorce his current wife so he could marry Gabrielle d'Estrées. But Marguerite strongly disagreed, stating that Gabrielle d'Estrées was certainly no princess, but merely a lady of the nobility. It was absolutely essential for the King of France to marry a princess of true dynastic standing.
Her wish is for Henry IV to have an heir for the monarchy, and she wants to be replaced by a princess who is roughly her equal in standing.
And actually, she's going to blackmail him, and it's more or less her who forces him to marry Marie de Medici.
Once her replacement had been designated, Margaret then agreed to a divorce, and she put forward a significant number of arguments. The official file concerning the dissolution of the marriage is presently kept within the National Archives.
First of all, she explains that she was not consenting on her wedding day. She explains that she was compelled by her brothers, King Charles IX and Henry III, and by the late Queen, their mother. Next, Margot puts forward an argument that is quite irrefutable for the Catholic Church. The inbreeding between the spouses, since it was forbidden to marry one's cousins. They were first cousins. Francis I, Margot's grandfather, was the brother of Margaret of Navarre, who was Henry's grandmother.
To ensure the Pope's conviction, Margaret states that Henry was a Protestant at the time of their wedding, and that he did not attend the Mass. The meticulously reviewed case receives the Vatican's full approval.
Here we have the bull of annulment for Henry and Margaret's marriage, which the Pope sent, bearing witness to its dissolution. And it reiterates word for word the arguments put forward in Margaret's interrogation, and also in Henry's interrogation.
Marguerite still has to address the matter of the financial conditions. The negotiation process with her husband would extend for a period of 6 years.
She holds all the keys, because without her personal consent to obtain the dissolution of the marriage, no dissolution of marriage can be obtained. And she fiercely negotiated for income, for tax revenues, and for pensions that the king has to provide her year after year.
The King of France agreed to pay off her debts. She had always been very heavily indebted because she consistently spent far more than she actually earned, and Henry IV did not hesitate to respond to his wife's financial demands. She would even treat herself to a grand carriage. It would be like someone buying a top-of-the-line luxury car today.
She also asked to retain her title as queen. Normally in France, there is only one queen. The queen is either the king's mother or she is the king's wife, but it is not the king's ex-wife who holds the title of queen. Yet, she retains all the prerogatives of royal majesty.
For Margaret, this separation from King Henry IV is almost a welcome relief.
Her divorce allowed her to escape this situation of being a wife. And the fact that she became friends with him, when I think that during their entire married life, they were rarely friends. It suited her perfectly well to be separated from that man and to be an independent woman once again.
Marguerite is granted a special additional favour by King Henry IV. The king grants her permission to depart from Auvergne and return to Paris. In 1605, she finally makes her grand return to the capital city after 23 long years of absence.
It is, in a certain way, a sort of dinosaur that is returning. It's a kind of curiosity. They look at her as if she came from another planet.
This is no longer Margaret of Valois, the one the court had celebrated, the one Ronsard had sung about. Her hair has grown much whiter now. All that made her the woman she was at her wedding has vanished.
She's dressed in an old-fashioned manner. The Parisians believed her to be dead.
She's a woman who remains coquettish. She's a woman who tries to recapture a little of her youth, but she knows she's no longer 20.
She hides her thinning hair. It's also said, and still the legend, that she cuts her page's hair to make a wig. She has lost much of her appeal, but she apparently remains eager for love.
She has that mystery, that indefinable quality that is sex appeal, and this I simply cannot explain to you.
His romantic life, still quite passionate, will moreover be the genesis of an incident that will generate considerable buzz in Paris. This dramatic episode occurs at the Hôtel de Sens, where she takes up residence when she returns to the capital.
It is the Archbishop of Sens, Renaud de Beaune, who make available to her his Parisian pied-à-terre, which is a very beautiful dwelling that is approximately a century old. Margaret makes herself at home, just as she always does when she finds herself in a castle. She takes up residence in the Archbishop's honorary apartments. She has her own private chamber, and she has her own private chapel. She is located very close to the Louvre and also near the Seine, so she can move about quite easily with her entire court around her.
On the 15th of April, 1606, Margaret was returning from Mass with her young lover, a man named Julien Dat, when this man suddenly collapsed, having been shot directly in the head by another of her many favorites, right there in front of her own home.
The Queen reportedly exclaimed, "Take my garter and strangle him with it," and so she's furious. She demanded the killer's head from the king, and the next day, before her eyes, she witnessed here, in front of the Hôtel de Sens, the beheading of her favorite's assassin.
After this tragedy, she decides to depart from the Hôtel de Sens to move into the palace that she had built for herself on the other side of the Seine.
She made the acquisition of very, very large plots of land on the left bank. Facing the Louvre, one always gets the impression, ultimately, with this choice, that she is always confronting power, she who could not wear the crown of France.
First, she gives a lot to charity. She builds many hospitals. She constructs orphanages. She is very, very generous, so the people begin to adore her. She is very, very popular.
For a full decade, the king's ex-wife is always present, with whom we've always maintained the very best relations. She receives all the ambassadors and hosts elegant balls.
Margaret's royal dining table also attracts a significant crowd. Despite her advancing years, the Queen has not lost even a bit of her hearty appetite.
She loves pastries above all else. She adores sugared almonds. She munches on them throughout the day. She loves candies, whether they're filled or not. She enjoys foie gras, she loves poultry, and she loves stuffed fish. She eats, well, with elegance, but she consumes at least 10 different dishes.
To savor all these delicacies, Margaret adopted the customs of the court and began to use a fork. At that period, this particular eating utensil represented a significant social indicator.
The main idea of the fork is to complement the knife, and truly to avoid eating with your fingers as much as possible. Its appearance, ultimately, coincides with the development of treatises on civility, in which civility is explicitly mentioned as a method to distinguish the upper classes from the lower classes. And through these new customs, one also maintains one's rank and demonstrates that one does not belong to the same world, ultimately. We have 2 tined forks, such as this silver fork here, and 3 tined forks, like this one, which is less precious and features a twisted handle, as well as some rather unique and removable accessories for 3 tined forks, with a small spoon-like attachment that features 4 rings, into which you can easily slide the tines of your fork, and in doing so, transform it into a functional spoon.
To maintain one's social standing, it's also essential to diligently care for one's physical body. During the Renaissance period, truly astonishing instruments specifically designed for personal grooming began to emerge.
This small, intriguing object that we are looking at right here is both a toothpick and an ear pick. It was designed to serve 2 distinct purposes. On the one hand, the finely pointed end functions as a practical toothpick, and on the other hand, the small spoon-shaped part is specifically designed to be used as an ear pick, which was, of course, the direct ancestor of the modern cotton bud, a product that certainly did not exist back in the 16th century. This small yet highly functional piece of jewellery was designed to be worn as a decorative pendant, positioned gracefully at the décolletage area, for example, which was a very popular and frequent custom.
Another new development within Margaret's inner circle. Women became more numerous. In the final years of her life, the Queen had, in fact, discovered a new cause to fight for.
The question of gender equality has been on the table for 2 centuries already. Everyone talks about it. It was referred as the woman question. Margaret wasn't interested in it until the end of her life. It's as if she didn't understand that she lives in a society where women don't have the same opportunities, the same rights as men. And it took her a long time to understand, and when she does, she writes a feminist text.
She writes the learned and subtle discourse in which she clearly defends the condition of women, because men think that man is the supreme being in the face of God.
She says, but I'm going to explain to you why women are appreciated, why they are estimable, and you are mistaken.
If it's for the body, it's too well known that a woman's is more beautiful, more delicate, and more finely crafted than a man's. And if it's for the soul, God delights in tranquil, serene, devout spirits, such as a woman's, not in tumultuous and bloodthirsty spirits like a man's.
Now she has come to realize the existence of pervasive misogyny, and so she is fighting against it.
Margaret, the last of the Valois line, also felt invested with a role as a link to the new Bourbon dynasty, founded by Henry IV. As a strong symbol of this transmission, she would bequeath her possessions to young Louis, the first son of Henry IV and Marie de Medici.
She finds a young boy who is Louis XIII, or the future Louis XIII, the Dauphin, and it's certainly a source of wonder for her. It's the child she never had, and she plays a role perhaps of an adoptive grandmother or an aunt.
Margaret has great affection for the Dauphin who, strangely enough, calls her mother, and she shares a peculiar kind of complicity with the one who wore the crown of France, namely Marie de Medici.
When she was presented to Marie de Medici, Margaret knew how to address her with words that were very, very proper and exceedingly modest, and a deep friendship would then blossom between these two women.
She brings to him a certain essence of the Renaissance, the taste for opulence, the love of grand festivities, the appreciation for refinement, which truly is the principal characteristic of the Valois court.
The last of the Valois thus legitimizes the very first dynasty of the Bourbons.
The Divorce Satirique is the founding text of the Black legend concerning Margaret.
This pamphlet, which was published almost 50 years after her death, was, without a doubt, written by Agrippa d'Aubigné, a Protestant author who often criticized King Henry IV for favoring the Catholics.
This is primarily a text intended to discredit Henry IV, but at that time, just as it is today, many people believed that to tarnish a man, it's often quite convenient to tarnish his wife, and so she truly bears the brunt of the criticism in this particular text. It is said there is no man of any sort or station in all of France with whom this depraved woman has not practiced her debauchery. The Margaret described as a lustful woman, a nymphomaniac. The word doesn't exist, as you can imagine, not yet.
She is also saddled with accusations of incestuous relationships with her brothers, which means we have truly hit rock bottom. In a sense, to use a well-known expression, Margaret's honor has been chucked out. I believe that in this instance, they truly intended to tarnish this woman's reputation, probably because she was a woman who was deeply committed to her personal freedom.
The problem, however, is that subsequently many ill-intentioned individuals completely overlooked its polemical nature and proceeded to use it as a genuine historical source, which quite obviously it is not.
Alexandre Dumas draws inspiration from this scandalous portrait to write his historical novel, Queen Margot. From the close of the year 1844, his novel began to be published in serial form in the daily newspaper La Presse.
To sell, newspaper directors request the collaboration of male and female novelists to create serials. It's the beginning of the serialized novel, so the public will want to buy it every day to know what happens next. Queen Margot was an immediate, immense success.
The exploitation of this portrait of a woman of loose morals can also be explained by the political context of the period after the French Revolution.
The country struggles to understand why, on the one hand, it champions ideals of liberty and equality, yet on the other, it withheld these from women. Why were they not granted the power to vote? Why were they not given the authority to decide? Why were they not allowed to serve in the National Assembly? While we seek out the great ladies of the ancien regime and expose their depravity, we show that they mixed everything up, the poor souls, and when they were in love, they would do absolutely anything. And so, women are dangerous. When you grant them even a little power, well, they invariably make poor use of it. And so Margaret has almost become the spearhead of this entire demonstration.
Several actresses, including Jean Moreau, have taken on the role of Queen Margot in cinema. But the one who truly left her indelible mark on the character was Isabelle Adjani in Patrice Chéreau's film. For the director and his co-screenwriter Danielle Thompson, it was absolutely essential to persuade the actress to accept this challenging role. Everything ultimately came down to a single reading session.
Isabelle was simply irreplaceable. We simply couldn't imagine making this film without her. And frankly, neither could Claude Barré, our producer. She was absolutely perfect for this role. So it was a truly, truly intense session. We were playing for our lives.
To truly give the character all the necessary presence and visual impact, the greatest possible care is always dedicated to the crafting of the costumes. A number of these magnificent pieces are carefully preserved today within the extensive archives of the Cinémathèque Française, right in Paris.
Here we have the truly magnificent gown, the very dress from the wedding ceremony, famously worn by the incomparable Isabelle Adjani. This costume creates a sense of tension and severity for Marguerite de Valois, quite simply because, indeed, it is high-necked, going all the way up with its collar. It is truly majestic. There is a phenomenal length to the train, 5.7 meters, and all of this is meant to show a little of the audacity, the sheer arrogance of this character.
Beyond just the portrait of a woman from the Renaissance, Patrice Chéreau portrays the sheer violence of an entire era. Upon the film's release, back in 1994, the staging of these religious wars already had a very particular resonance within society.
We were very, very much impacted by what was happening around us. We were in the era of the Ayatollahs in Iran. We were in the Bosnian War. And we also realized that we were in a bloody period of history, ultimately. We continue to kill for God. I believe that has never ceased.